After a tumultuous week in British politics, likely to be followed by another tumultuous week in British politics, welcome to Political Paradigms. Theo, hello.
Hello.
What a week. I'm going to say it. What a shit show. We don't swear on here normally, but it's the only way I can think of describing what's been going on. How have you been taking in sort of the plethora of news this week?
Well, I feel like when they say, you can have decades where nothing happens in politics and weeks where decades happen, this is one of those weeks.
Now, we'll be talking about the fallout of Lord Cameron very soon. As this podcast is probably going to be up on Sunday night, Monday morning, he will be Lord Cameron probably by the time that you're listening to this. It's Monday when he's is invested into the House of Lords or something along those lines. We've got the Suella Braverman drama. The letter that she sent out. You know what? Should we start with the letter that she sent out? Because that happened after we did our reshuffle pod. So
Go on.
she sent out a really scathing letter, basically saying the Prime Minister had no mandate, saying that there was like a deal, which obviously there'd been speculation about, between her and Sunak during the leadership contest, that he would agree to all these sort of personal hobby horses of hers policy-wise. Said he was sort of guilty of magical thinking. He had no interest in delivering for people. Let's have a look. You have manifestly and repeatedly failed to deliver on every single one of these key priorities. You have a lack of interest in what we're doing. You have betrayed your promise to do whatever it takes to stop the boats. You betrayed your promise to the nation. All this kind of stuff. Theo, do you think this is damaging for Sunak, or do you think he priced this in when he got rid of her?
I think, it might slightly account for the current shift of many Tory voters over to reform, like the Tory right, breaking away from the main party even more. It is obviously very scathing, and it kind of puts it into words that Sunak really was either subverting or never truly interested in Suella Braverman's agenda.
Yeah, it is kind of one of those things of if you make a dirty deal with Suella Braverman, it's obviously going to come back and bite you, isn't it? And that appears to be what's happened here. And I think the thing that Tory leaders seem to find again and again is you can't truly appease the right of the party. They will always turn on you, basically. And I think the other thing is sort of looking at this situation, you put it really well earlier this week, sort of the patrician Conservatives back at the forefront, round the cabinet table, Rishi Sunak, David Cameron, got James Cleverly, Victoria Prentice, all these kind of people, Gillian Keegan, sort of the not liberal Tory, because they're all very right-wing economically, but the Tory that respects institutions, as Lewis Goodall put it in the New Statesman this week. The sort of the brand of Conservative that isn't interested in being sort of insurrectionary, is more interested in just governing in sort of a stable manner and implementing right-wing priorities in a less shouty way. Do you think this brand of conservatism can hold together the party for the next year, Theo, or is it going to be every man for himself and woman?
I think, the party is kind of in free fall, and within that, there is an every man for himself dynamic going on. But clearly what's happening is that the Tory wets have gained control of the party. They've pushed out the Dries, the Thatcherists, the Bravermanites, and they're just trying to kind of, I suppose, shake that faction off as quickly as they can so they can kind of, I guess, recoup and brace for impact, i.e. the upcoming election. So we've essentially just seen the party officially really split in two, and many even defect from the party in the stats that I believe you're going to read out shortly.
Certainly.
So this is Sunak's election fighting machine, the Tory wets in his little disparate cabinet of remaining one nation conservatives.
Now, this is the interesting thing, right? Because this is how we're sort of inclined to portray them. This is how we sort of see them. Do you think these people truly are one nation Tories? Because a one nation Tory sort of in the age of the Thatcher era would be in favour of nationalisation, would be in favour of sort of mass public investment and sort of an active industrial policy, in many ways to the right of Keir Starmer on economic policy, the left, of Keir Starmer. Are these one nation Tories, or are these just a different kind of Thatcherite?
I feel like obviously, if we're talking about the Thatcher era, that was the era in which the economic and possibly social as well, Overton window was shifted to the right. So these are the kinds of people who will call themselves One Nation Tories and try to appeal to the kind of middle class liberal Tory voters who do
Yeah.
resent the culture war stuff and do kind of like, paternalistic economic policies, but still, a value of economic freedom. So that's the kind of, I suppose, brand they're trying to present. They would call it One Nation
Yeah, they
Tory.
would. You're
But
right.
categorically, they're not.
I think you're right. This is. I mean, the kind of One Nation Tory I was saying, they don't exist anymore, do they? This is what it is now.
You've got like Rory Stewart,
Yeah.
and that's about it.
And he would be at the rightward edge of like the old school One Nation Tories. He would probably be relatively sympathetic to some Thatcherite ideas. So it really, when you look at it in that way, the Conservative Party has probably changed much more than the Labour Party in the last sort of 40 years. And I suppose the other thing is, do you think there is an actual, it's like we say, the polling indicates maybe not, there is an actual constituency for this sort of socially liberal, economically liberal kind of politics? Because looking at the polling, like, do we think maybe those kind of David Cameron, Remain type voters are now permanently realigned as Labour and Lib Dem voters, and they're looking to reassemble a coalition that can't be reassembled? Or do you think that coalition might be reassemblable under certain circumstances?
I mean, if we just look at the events affecting party popularity this week with regard to those voters, Cameron being brought in did affect, it did bring down the Tory polling numbers, mainly due to, again, like more rightward voters shifting away from the party. However, these kind of, as you were saying, liberal Tory constituencies, I think honestly, with Labour kind of caught up in this in a dispute over Israel and Gaza, that's unlikely to affect those voters, which we do know many of whom have been brought over to the Labour side now. So I think this is a very feeble attempt to get back at that traditional base for the Tories.
Yeah, and it's only half-hearted, right? Because they're still they've got one foot in sort of the culture war camp and one foot in we've reappointed David Cameron. So there's a bit of an identity crisis going on. On to Labour. We might as well look at Labour quickly. They have had, by all accounts, a bad week in terms of PR and in terms of party management. It may have been mostly overshadowed by the government, which is kind of an own goal for the government. They had a big rebellion and quite a lot of minor, but not major figures, but minor frontbench resignations, quite a number of them, and about a quarter, about 30% of the Labour Parliamentary Party voting against Labour on a motion calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which the leadership opposes. It sort of exemplified and showed Labour's divisions over Gaza and the situation in Israel and Palestine, where obviously the Conservative Party is united around a very pro-Israel stance, almost completely. In terms of the scale of the rebellion, it is the same size in terms of percentage of the PLP rebellion that Tony Blair suffered over Iraq. And it is definitely a blow to Keir Starmer's authority. The counter-argument to that is, of course, this will colour some people's views of Labour. It may annoy some of their core base, maybe not to the extent they don't vote for them, but it might do. And it may also, to swing voters, make Labour look a bit less appealing, a bit more divided, same old Labour kind of stuff. But obviously in the context where the government's in the hole it's in, this is not going to be what defines the next general election. Theo, on a scale of like 10 being they've lost the election and 1 being they drop like 1 point in the polls and recover it the following week, how bad for Labour has this week been, would you say?
I would say, in the context of the government's PR catastrophe, I'd say 2 to 3%. Starmer has a huge margin of publicity error, if you like, to have PR screw ups like this. And, even divisions in the party which do potentially dissuade voters. I mean, if you think about it, who are these voters going to go to if they don't go to Labour? And again, these international issues which are not directly involved in yet, and hopefully it stays that way, but that we're not directly involved in. do not tend to swing elections, especially when you've got a government that's tearing itself apart and hemorrhaging votes to the modern UKIP, etc. So I think, yeah, this is, I'd say 2 to 3. This is something they can recover from. I'm sure Starmer's got uniting words to try and, bring back the voters. But at the end of the day, no matter how this, goes over, it's unlikely to detract from their almost inevitable majority they're going to get. Again, I've been talking every podcast about the picture we've been building up. It's a long-term trend towards a big Labour victory next election, and very little is going to sway that, though this has surprised me in the extent to which it's affected Labour's polling numbers.
This is, so looking at, in terms of vote share, obviously up to this point, we haven't seen much of a drop for Labour. A couple of polls out after this week did not show a hit to Keir Starmer's ratings. He did take a little hit a month back. It did show a slight drop for Labour. I think this week we'll see if Labour drops a little bit. Again, in the wider context, it'll still be a massive Labour lead. Looking at this, so early October, I'll send this graph to you, Theo. 33% saw Labour as united and 29% saw it as divided. Obviously, for the majority of their time in opposition, they've generally been seen as divided. Mid-November, so earlier this week, 23% said united, that's down. 44% said divided, that's up quite a lot. And then at the end of this week, in the space of a couple of days, divided went from 44% to nearly 60%, and united went down to 16%. But this is in the context of only 7% thinking the Tories are united and 76% thinking they're divided. So as Theo says, there is kind of a thing of like, are people going to go, Labour are divided, I'll vote for the more divided party? Probably not. And it's only on one issue, and it's a foreign policy issue, whereas the Conservative Party seems to be divided on, what, everything?
Pretty much everything.
Its entire sense of self?
Yeah, probably that too.
Personnel, sense of self, all of that. But if you see those numbers, obviously not great.
Whether we should have a human rights enshrined in statute law, that too.
Oh, yeah, that. Oh, I mean, the entire concept of human rights is kind of a sore topic in the Conservative Party at the moment.
Is it a good time to transition perhaps to the Supreme Court decision, which we're supposed to talk about first?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right thing to do. So, Supreme Court, Rwanda, big flagship policy. Sunak made his whole thing stop the boats, and he made stopping the boats and using the Rwanda policy to do that sort of his core immigration-facing policy. It's up there for the Conservative base with health and the economy. It's health, the economy, and stopping the boats, controlling immigration. Consecutive Conservative governments have promised to reduce immigration. Immigration has continued to go up post-Brexit. This has remained the case. There are a variety of proposals that different parties have proposed in terms of how there may be sort of constructive ways to deal with the boats crisis. But obviously the Conservative Party has taken a very hardline stance on this, and the judgment from the Supreme Court was about as bad as it could get. It was not that the European Convention on Human Rights was stopping this, it's that basically everything was. There were like this piece of legislation, that piece of legislation, this piece of legislation, basically impossible to get around it. The government has promised they're going to bring forward a treaty to try and basically designate Rwanda as well as a safe country and see if that sort of gets through the logjam. It looks like anything that they do, and they're promising to stay in Parliament over Christmas if needs be, will still need to go through the House of Lords, and it looks like the Lords will probably block it. And to override the House of Lords, you need a couple of years. There are not a couple of years in this parliamentary term. There is a clash between Parliament, the Commons, and the Lords, the elected government and the unelected second chamber, the judiciary and Parliament and Commons, the Commons trying to exercise its supremacy over the Lords and the Supreme Court, but with time running out on the parliamentary calendar. It's going to be a big fight. It's probably going to be the main story next week. It's completely overshadowed everything from David Cameron to Labour divisions. It has been the story of the week, and the British public is pretty sceptical that the plan will work. They want the boats stopped. That's what the polling indicates. They're not necessarily opposed to Rwanda, but they're also not wedded to Rwanda. They just see a government that they don't believe is delivering. Theo, do you think this is going to be the defining story of the next few months in British politics?
Yeah, I think honestly, with the image you just painted of huge conflict between the branches of government, right in the final month leading up to an election is very bad optics for the government. As you said, like there are ways to work around this for the government. I mean, at PMQ's Sunak, basically on his last legs, tried to frame and characterize the decision as lawful, but with some small legal caveats that needed to be worked around. But all of these will take time. And yes, technically, if you had a 5-year parliamentary session ahead of you, you could override the Lords, you could change the law, the Supreme Court's decision wouldn't matter. The Commons can essentially do what it wants when it has the time and the backing to do that. He doesn't. He's got a crumbling support base in Parliament. He's got probably a stubborn House of Lords. The entire public's eyes on him. So for him to then attempt these workarounds with everything else that his party's suffering in terms of popularity in the year before a general election, I think it could be catastrophic, and it could just maybe be the thing that pushes him over the edge in terms of popularity, if that hasn't already happened.
So I suppose the devil's advocate case, right, is, they can make this into a big dividing line. They know it's going to fail to get through whatever measures they propose, and they know it might split the Parliamentary Conservative Party in half, but they can go, Labour are stopping us doing this, and then run on this. And obviously, the public may side with the Conservative position over the Labour position on this. If the Conservatives, generally, the tougher position on immigration is the more popular position. Do you think that is enough to swing an election? I mean, I don't think it is, but Theo, what do you think?
Well, perhaps we could end up with a situation analogous to 2019, except you substitute get Brexit done with stop the boats, and the whole campaigning line of the Tories in this upcoming election is we need to stop the deadlock, stop the parliament, stop the Supreme Court, stop the Labour Party, blocking us from stopping the boats. I mean, if they made that the primary campaign slogan, I mean, it would probably win them more popularity than they've got now, but it would be a very, monumental, decisive, very divisive decision. And I think it would push a lot of voters on the margin away from them. And the sacrifice would be made in order to get back the Tory right voters, which is clearly not the direction Sunak wants to move in. But yes, I guess playing devil's advocate, we could hypothetically see it become a major campaigning issue for them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Theo. I think if they pitched it right and they were able to portray it as Labour blocking them rather than them being ineffective, because that's how Labour will try and spin it. They always say the Conservatives, they're messing up the small boats, they don't know what they're doing kind of thing. If they can swing it properly, it's probably a damage limitation strategy. The actual election will be determined by economics and by sort of the party brands, and Labour's winning hands down on both those issues at the moment. But if the Conservatives can sort of bring their core voters out, they can minimise the defeat.
Yes, and also this is occupying a significant amount of people's political bandwidth. It could be a major Brexit issue. And, what a Brexit style issue, maybe not perhaps on that scale. I'm not going to exaggerate that much.
Like a smaller version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, Brexit was able to flip the red wall. Brexit allowed the government to demonize the Supreme Court and have, enemies of the people on the front page of the Times. I mean, that if they do, play their cards right, they could turn this into a major national issue. But it would just be, directly contradictory to the direction they've just decided to go in with the appointment of Cameron and, everything he represents.
Now, the whispers I've been hearing, there's a lot of whispers on this week's show. It's been reported that not only Suella Braverman, it's pretty common knowledge she said this, but people in the government are looking at, considering, obviously not seriously, or maybe it is, who knows, we'll only know when they roll the lectern out, considering getting into a position where Labour block this in the Lords, or Labour and other peers in the Lords, but obviously they'll say it's Labour doing it, and they can go, right, we're having a snap general election early next year, straight in. Now, Rishi Sunak has refused to deny this. There is precedent in UK history for governments dissolving Parliament and calling elections when they can't pass big constitutional changes. Liberal governments in the early 1900s did a lot of this kind of thing and kept holding elections, basically going, Parliament won't do this, let us do it. So here's Rishi Sunak it's like a minute-long clip, being interviewed for ITV News, and he does not deny an election. We'll get your opinion on this after we played it, Theo. Oh, here we go. Here's the clip.
We've got to get the Rwanda plan up and running. I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. People are sick of this merry-go-round. I want to end it. My patience is wearing thin like everyone else's. That's why our emergency legislation will make it crystal clear that Rwanda is safe for these purposes. It meets all the concerns that people have raised because of our new arrangement with them. And we want to stop any more domestic challenges to this programme. And I've also been clear that we won't let a foreign court stand in the way of us getting a flight off to Rwanda.
It takes a long time, though, as you know, for legislation to get through Parliament. Would you call an election if the Lords block your plan?
Well, it doesn't have to take a long time to get legislation through, and that's a question for the Labour Party. We're determined to get this through as quickly as possible. So the real question is, are the Labour Party going to stand in the way and stop this from happening, or are they going to work with us and support this bill so we can get it through as quickly as possible? I know that the British people want this problem gripped. I know the British people will want this new law to pass so we can get flights off to Rwanda. So really the question is for Keir Starmer and Labour Party, why don't they?
Theo, is that a man considering a snap general election?
Well, I think that does somewhat align with my speculation before that this could become a major campaign issue and in a potentially even sooner general election than we thought. I don't see it. I don't even think. Correct me if I'm wrong. That supporting the Rwanda plan, I don't think that's Labour's position. I don't think they do support it, so I can't see why they would vote it through.
No, they're opposed to it. They're opposed to it.
So they're opposed to it, and in fact, it benefits them for there to be a snap general election while they're still riding high. So essentially, there's no way for Sunak to get this through because Labour have no reason to. Double negative. I mean, yeah, there could easily be a snap election, January or something like that.
I mean, the Labour, even, on a bad day, right now, the Labour response to do you want an early general election is don't threaten me with a good time. Yes, we'll take it. It'd kind of be what they'd be saying in Labour HQ. So we've got that going on. That's going to be the big story on next week's podcast, I suspect. We've got the polling, which has been very interesting this last week or so. Because in a few polls, one of which People Polling is almost certainly an outlier and is a pollster that generally shows lower results for the Conservatives. But we've seen this in other polls as well. This is a pretty credible one. Techne UK has the Conservatives down on 22% last week. That is a very low vote share. As I say, People Polling had them at 19%. 19%, and the vote for Reform in that poll, Reform UK, was 10%. So Reform only 9 points behind the Conservative Party. As I say, an outlier, but a staggering poll. And Reform UK, in an average of polling, is now up to 8%. Worth saying, in by-elections and council elections, the Reform vote does not seem to be showing up, so it may just be like a saying it to pollsters phenomena. Meanwhile, in the wake of the Labour-Gaza situation, Opinion and We Think polling have both shown Labour's vote share drop by 3 points to 45% in one poll and to 40% in another poll. I don't think these mainly appear, it's sort of two pollsters that are bad for Labour normally have shown them down. Two that are good for Labour have shown the Tories down. It may just be noise. Everything's very chaotic. Theo, what were you going to say?
About Labour's share or the polls?
I thought you were about to come in on something there. Yeah.
I mean, just to generally comment, I think you're right. Even if the Tories are hemorrhaging votes to Reform, it's not like Reform are going to win any seats, but it's just going to split the right-wing vote, like we saw in 2015. I mean, UKIP, pretty much equivalent to this party. Probably in terms of the base they represent, they got like 12% of the vote. Not a single seat, but it's significantly deducted from the Tories' share, and they had a very narrow majority. So when they're not even on track to win a majority, and then hemorrhaging votes to a smaller party, it's not looking good. And again, Labour's losses significantly marginal compared to that, I would say.
Basically, yeah, Labour losses are currently margin of error.
The organisation of our conversations, we try to make it reflect what's happening in politics, i.e. chaotic.
It's a metaphor. Anyway, that word, definite Conservative fall in vote share this week to about 25% on average. So it looks like their votes are moving to not to UKIP, to Reform UK, Freudian slip. On the Labour side, they may have taken a small hit from this week. They may not have done. It's basically going to be a case of we'll see what the other polls say this week. But it looks, just sort of seeing the numbers for the Conservatives this week, Theo, it's staggering because it does look to me more and more like sort of the modal outcome for 2024 now is the complete wipeout. Like, that's the most likely outcome because the numbers I'm seeing are so bad for the government. Do you think there's anything positive to be said, or do you think they are just sort of going to hell in a handcart, basically?
Yeah, probably the latter, to be fair. We can do all the technical analysis we want. What's happening is the Tory vote share, predicted vote share is going down and down. Labour's is going up, and we do have, small, hikes and troughs like this week, but the overall trend, stays the same. I think next week will be a very telling indicator of whether that's right. We'll see how Labour recovers from, the publicity troubles they'd had over Gaza, and whether the Tories recover from Cameron or whether they continue to go down in spite of or because of Cameron and Rwanda.
And our final story for this week is the possibility of another Conservative leadership contest, which I'm sure we're all very, very excited about. There have been murmurs, there have been whispers, there have been complaints. There's an article in The Telegraph with a lot of MPs saying it. For what it's worth, my law professor is convinced they're going to replace Rishi Sunak with David Cameron. So everyone's speculating about it. I'm very sceptical, but sort of the more chaos I'm seeing, the more I'm like, well, it's not impossible. Theo, what sort of percentage chance would you give a leadership challenge between now and the election in the Conservative Party?
I'd say 30-40% probably.
Oh, so you think it's not pie in the sky. We're not indulging in sort of ridiculous hypotheticals. This could happen.
No, I think Braverman's challenge is strong. Again, if they continue hemorrhaging votes to reform, it's not looking good. Sunak's, he's basically been backed into a corner. His party's image is damaged beyond repair. The right of his party, a big bulk of his base has split away. His attempts to appeal to the centre have done nothing to help him. So essentially, he's lost in all courts, and a resignation is likely. We'll see how the pressure mounts, and also just simply a no confidence motion, him being kicked out forcibly if he chooses not to resign.
You're leaning towards you think a resignation is likely.
Well, I think something that triggers a leadership election is not pie in the sky. I'll put it that way.
You heard it here first, folks. We're in the twilight zone again, guys. This is it was a good time to start this podcast, I'll say that much, because it does feel like sort of the wheels are coming off. And in many ways, sort of the divisions in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, I mean, it's cliche to say they're ungovernable, but they are. It is making me think, how on earth can they keep sort of the wheels on the track for another year, another 12 months? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not just kind of throwing out speculations like that for no reason. I do think, just assessing the situation, it does seem like a likely outcome. I don't, Sunak is under a lot of pressure. Whether he sees it as a worthy payoff to bear under this pressure for another 12 months while losing popularity, only to fight a fruitless, general election, whether he sees that as a worthy investment, I wouldn't, and I think a lot of people would probably be questioning whether he's going to go ahead with that.
I think the big question that will define British politics in the next 6 months is whether what overrides, right? I can't bear doing this anymore. I want to get out. Or Sunak just being like, let's be Prime Minister a bit longer and I can have it on the resume that I was PM for 2 years. Which of those two things prevails in his mind?
Yeah, I'm sure, that will look nice on his CV. He can go get a nice, cushy investment banker job like Nick Clegg, or I think he's at Facebook or whatever. But yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but I think you're right, Theo. If the polls stabilise or narrow a little bit heading into 2024, then I think he's secure and the majority of the parliamentary party will back him if a challenge comes. If the Conservative vote goes downward, ends up at 20% or something in the next 2 to 3 months, I think that's where like every MP is at risk of losing their seat, and they will be like, let's get, I don't know, dare I say James Cleverly? Dare I say Penny Mordaunt? Break the glass emergency button type situation. I think that's what will determine what happens. If they see the sort of Reform UK taking Conservative votes, and that is a trend that continues, the classic Conservative self-preservation instinct will kick in. Because up to this point, the reason he's been safe is people have said Sunak is our best bet. Even if he's a bad bet, no one else could do better. Maybe at this point, some people are thinking, maybe someone could do better.
For sure. And also, yeah, again, immigration, which is, which is dividing them a lot. Very, very much along the same lines as Brexit. Then in the same way that Boris Johnson was elected to stop hemorrhaging votes to UKIP, we could see Suella Braverman or someone of that camp lead a very strong campaign, at least, very hotly contest the leadership in the event of an election, because of, the way the right are clearly hemorrhaging at the moment.
Theo, thank you for joining me. I don't know if it'll be next week or who knows. There could be an emergency podcast. Something crazy could happen. We're
not ruling out an emergency pod this week.
Exactly. We never are. We've got the budget coming up, and it does look like the Conservative Party is planning actual tax cuts. Jeremy Hunt says it's time to go for growth. This is what we've been waiting for. They're looking at inheritance tax, national insurance, income tax. They're looking at everything. They're embracing their inner Liz Truss. So we'll see.
Yes. Oh, we did not actually touch on the inflation report, but it clearly does not seem to be significant electorally. So
no, you're so right. That was meant to be their main good news story. They hit the half inflation target, and that's look, victory. Clearly not improved people's perceptions of things. Will marginal tax cuts? I guess we'll find out. That's another sort of, the polling will be out of date next week. We'll know where we are, and then the budget might change it again. So everything's in flux. And all of that on next week's pod. Theo, thank you for joining me on Political Paradigms.
Thank you.